The Tudor-style house built in the 1960s, nestled in a residential neighborhood near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, glowed with the warm red brick color under the autumn sunset. Emily Harrison had inherited this house directly from her grandmother 3 months ago. She led a fulfilling life as a nurse working at a pediatric clinic, but deep in her heart, she carried an unspoken burden. As Emily opened the front door, she listened to the laughter coming from inside the house. Her husband Michael and her sister Sophie were having what sounded like an enjoyable conversation. Michael worked as an architectural designer from his home office and was a creative and sensitive person. However, he wasn't very social and tended to keep his distance from people other than Emily. "Welcome home, Emily," Michael said, appearing from the living room. He was holding blueprints in his hands, apparently absorbed in his work as usual. "You're late today." "I had an emergency patient," Emily replied with a smile. "How were the children at the clinic today?" Sophie turned around from the living room sofa. Working as a freelance yoga instructor, she was a free-spirited and attractive woman. Her long chestnut hair was casually tied up, and she wore relaxed clothing as always, radiating a model-like beauty. "Good work today." "I had 3 new students come to my class," Sophie reported happily. "They all seemed to love my classes." As Emily watched her sister's bright expression, she felt complex emotions stirring in her heart. Sophie had experienced a breakup with her boyfriend 2 months ago and had been depressed for a while, but since moving into this house, she had become remarkably energetic. Emily was genuinely happy that her sister had bounced back. While starting dinner preparations, Emily reflected on their life as a family of 3. On the surface, they were a very close family. Michael loved his wife, Sophie adored her sister, and Emily cherished them both. However, deep in her heart, there was a secret that only Emily knew. It was about the infertility treatments she had been undergoing for 3 years. Monthly tests, medication side effects, and disappointments that repeated over and over again. Michael wanted children, and Emily wanted to fulfill that wish for him. However, reality was harsh, and she had received a diagnosis of unexplained infertility from her doctor. "Emily, are you okay?" Michael asked with concern. "You seem tired lately." "Yes, I'm fine," Emily forced a smile. "It's just that the clinic has been busy." In reality, the mental fatigue from the infertility treatments was accumulating. She felt elated and dejected with each test result, blamed her own body, and continued to feel sorry toward her husband. However, she didn't want her family to know about it. Especially in front of her sister, who was free and radiant, she didn't want to show her weakness. The time spent sitting at the dining table with the 3 of them for dinner was the most peaceful time of Emily's day. Michael talked about his new project, and Sophie shared amusing stories about her students. As Emily listened to their conversations, she wondered how long these tranquil days would last. This house inherited from her grandmother was a special place for Emily. As a child, she often came to visit and learned life lessons from her grandmother. Her grandmother's words, "Family means trusting and supporting each other," resonated in her heart. After dinner, the 3 of them relaxed in the living room watching television. Michael spread out his blueprints, Sophie flipped through a magazine, and Emily did her knitting. It was like a picture-perfect family scene. However, Emily sometimes felt a subtle atmosphere flowing between her husband and sister. She thought it was probably just her overthinking. "Why don't we all go on a picnic next Saturday?" Sophie suddenly suggested. "The weather forecast says it'll be sunny, and it would be a nice change of pace." "That sounds great," Michael agreed. "I've been cooped up at home lately." Emily also smiled and agreed. She wanted to treasure these family moments. However, in the corner of her heart, she felt something was off. She couldn't yet clearly understand what it was. As autumn deepened and Pittsburgh's cityscape was wrapped in beautiful fall colors, subtle changes began to visit Emily's life. Her work at the pediatric clinic was still fulfilling, but recently she often had to work overtime. A new nurse had just started, and she was spending a lot of time training her. "I'll probably be late again," Emily said to Michael during breakfast. "The new hire, Sarah, isn't used to things yet, and I'll have to stay late with her today." Michael looked up from his blueprints and smiled. You're such a hard worker. But don't overdo it. Sophie poked her head out from the kitchen. I'm also going to be taking on several new classes lately, so I'll be getting busy too. From this time on, the three of them began to have slightly different life rhythms. Emily often left home early in the morning and returned late at night. Michael was assigned a large residential project and spent increasing amounts of time holed up in his home office, absorbed in design work. Sophie's classes at the new yoga studio became popular, and she often went out from afternoon to evening. At first, they understood and supported each other's busyness. Emily was proud of Michael's new project and genuinely happy about Sophie's success. However, she gradually noticed that the family was spending less time together. Today we can finally have dinner together as a family for the first time in a while, Emily said happily one Friday evening. She had been able to leave work on time for once. Sorry, Emily, Michael said apologetically. I have a conference call with a client tonight. Due to the time difference, it has to be late at night. I also have a special private lesson tonight, Sophie added regretfully. It's a new student, and tonight is the only time that works for them. Emily tried to hide her disappointment, but loneliness spread in her heart. She felt as if family time was being stolen away somehow. However, she told herself it was unavoidable. Everyone was walking their own path in life. On weekends too, there was less family time than before. Michael often went to his workplace, explaining that he was going to see actual construction sites. Sophie valued time with her new friends and was hardly home on weekends. I'm going hiking with friends today, Sophie said one Saturday morning, hurriedly getting ready. I'm going to do yoga in nature for the first time in a while. Have fun, Emily replied with a smile. But be careful. Alone in the house, Emily was doing cleaning and laundry while thinking. Was this a normal growth process for families? Or was there some fundamental problem? She thought that the mental stress from infertility treatments might be clouding her judgment. However, small feelings of unease were definitely accumulating. Michael's voice when talking on the phone sometimes sounded gentler than before. Sophie was wearing new clothes more often and looked even more beautiful than usual. And the atmosphere when the two of them were together seemed subtly different from before. One day, Emily came home earlier than planned. A patient's sudden schedule change had cancelled the afternoon appointments. As she approached the house, warm light was leaking from the living room window. She could see Michael and Sophie having what appeared to be a serious conversation. Emily quietly opened the front door. She could hear their conversation. But is this really okay? She heard Michael's voice. It's fine. We're not doing anything wrong, came Sophie's reply. Emily entered the front door making footsteps. I'm home. Oh, welcome back, Sophie turned around. You're early today. A patient had a cancellation, Emily observed their expressions. They seemed somewhat flustered. What were you talking about? About Michael's new project, Sophie answered. It's a very interesting design. Michael nodded but seemed somehow restless. Right. The new client's requirements are complex, and I was asking Sophie for her opinion too. Emily smiled and replied, I see. Sophie has artistic sense. That night, lying in bed next to Michael, Emily asked her husband, You seem busy lately. Is the new project going well? More or less, Michael's reply was vague. But you seem busy too, Emily. The clinic work must be tough, right? Yes, but it's fulfilling, Emily gazed at her husband's profile. Michael, we haven't talked much lately, have we? Michael fell silent. Then, in a small voice, he said, That's true. But we're both busy, so it can't be helped. That's right, Emily agreed, but something was bothering her heart. Several weeks passed, and autumn was transitioning into winter. The family relationships were peaceful on the surface, but they no longer felt the warmth they once had. Emily began to doubt her own perceptions. The stress from infertility treatments might be making her think everything in a negative direction. However, one night, Emily witnessed a decisive moment. When she went to the kitchen to get some water, she saw Michael and Sophie embracing in the living room. It was a momentary event, but it gave Emily's heart a deep shock. The two separated immediately and acted as if nothing had happened. Emily also pretended not to see and quietly returned to her room. That night, she couldn't sleep at all. The next morning, Emily stared at herself in the mirror. There was a face exhausted from 3 years of infertility treatments. However, in those eyes dwelt a new determination. The time had come to know the truth. "Good morning," Sophie greeted brightly. "Good morning," Emily replied, maintaining her composure. "It's nice weather today." "Yes. Today feels like it's going to be a special day." Sophie's words had some meaningful resonance. Emily smiled and left the house. However, in her heart, she was beginning to prepare to take action of her own. She no longer intended to accept the ambiguous situation. She would learn the truth and reclaim her life. That afternoon, Emily knocked on the door of a private detective agency for the first time. The receptionist was kind and understood Emily's situation. "Cases like this are not unusual," the detective said calmly. "Learning the truth can sometimes be painful, but do you still want to know?" "Yes," Emily answered without hesitation. "I want to know the truth." On Saturday evening, Emily returned home from the neighborhood supermarket. A week had passed since she hired the detective agency, and the investigation results weren't out yet, but her state of mind was completely different from before. She was ready to know the truth. When she opened the front door, she didn't hear the usual sounds of television or casual conversation. Instead, a tense atmosphere was drifting from the living room. Emily put the shopping bags in the kitchen and headed to the living room. Michael and Sophie were sitting on the sofa as if they had been waiting for her. Both had more serious expressions than usual, and there was an atmosphere suggesting they were about to have an important conversation. Emily's heart began to beat rapidly. "Emily," Sophie was the first to speak. "Sit down. We have something important to discuss." Emily slowly sat in the chair across from them. Michael wouldn't meet her eyes and was fidgeting with his hands. Sophie took a deep breath and looked straight at Emily. "I'm pregnant," Sophie's voice was quiet but clear. "It's Michael's baby." Emily felt as if her world had stopped for a moment. Various emotions swirled in her head, but strangely, she wasn't that surprised. Somewhere in her heart, she might have anticipated this moment. "I see," Emily replied quietly. "Since when?" "Since 2 months ago," Sophie answered, blushing slightly. "We love each other." "I'm sorry to you, but this was a natural progression." Michael finally looked up. "Emily, Be quiet, Michael," Sophie interrupted her husband's words. "I'll do the talking." Sophie stood up and stood in front of Emily. At that moment, her expression changed. It was no longer the face of her spoiled younger sister, but the face of a cold and calculating woman. "I'll be honest," Sophie's voice had a coldness she had never heard before. "Someone defective like you isn't needed, right? Being unable to get pregnant for 3 years means you're a failure as a woman." Emily gasped. Was this really her sister? "This house should belong to our new family," Sophie continued. "You should leave. An infertile failure is just in the way." Michael stood up from the sofa. His face showed a mixture of guilt and determination. "Emily, it's clear that you can't get pregnant," Michael's voice was trembling, but his words were cruel. "I need children. I want a family. With you, that can't be fulfilled. So please divorce me," Michael continued. "Sophie and I want to start a new life." Emily looked back and forth between the two of them. Her husband and sister were throwing the most cruel words at her. However, strangely, Emily's heart was calm. Rather, she felt a kind of relief. She no longer had to act out false peace. Emily slowly smiled. Seeing that smile, Michael and Sophie became a bit confused. "I see," Emily said quietly. "But Michael, is it really your child?" Michael's face became confused. "What are you saying?" "Of course it's my child." Emily took out a brown envelope from her handbag. It was a preliminary report from the detective. The formal report wasn't ready yet, but she had already obtained photos and basic investigation results. Actually, I've known, Emily said while opening the envelope. About your relationship, and about Sophie's relationships with other men. Sophie's face turned pale. What are you talking about? Emily placed photos one by one on the table. Photos of Sophie talking intimately with a man named Jim, having dinner at a restaurant, and entering his apartment. Jim Thompson, Emily read the name aloud. Your ex-boyfriend, right, Sophie? But actually, the relationship continued. Those are old photos, Sophie said in agitation. Look at the dates, Emily replied calmly. All these photos were taken after you moved into this house. Michael picked up the photos and checked the dates. His face turned increasingly pale. I hired a detective and have been investigating for a month, Emily continued. I knew about your affair and Sophie's two-timing. Sophie desperately tried to deny it. It's a misunderstanding. I really ended things with Jim. Is that so? Emily took out another paper. These are his cell phone call records. You can see that you were in contact with him almost daily. Michael stared at Sophie. Sophie, is this true? Sophie seemed to give up, or perhaps she became defiant. Yes, I was meeting with Jim too. But so what? It might be your child. Might be? Michael's voice trembled. Weren't you certain it was mine? Emily stood up and walked to the window. Outside, snow had begun to fall. Michael, when did Sophie tell you about the pregnancy? Emily asked without turning around. A week ago, Michael answered in confusion. And when did Sophie last meet with Jim? Emily pointed to the photos. 3 days ago. Silence dominated the room. Michael stared at Sophie, and Sophie stared at the floor. Let me tell you, when I started knowing, Emily turned around. I felt something was off 2 months ago. Your glances, conversations, and the change in the atmosphere in the house. But what was decisive was the night a week ago, Emily continued. When I saw you two embracing. Michael and Sophie looked at each other. Even so, I wanted certainty, Emily's voice was calm. So I hired a detective and let you swim while knowing everything. I wanted to see your true nature with my own eyes. And tonight, you showed me exactly the true nature I expected, Emily smiled. You called me defective, cursed me as a failure, and tried to drive me out of this house. Sophie began to cry. I'm sorry. I didn't know what to do. Crying is useless, Sophie, Emily said calmly. You calculated and orchestrated this. You seduced Michael and tried to use pregnancy as a weapon to steal everything from me. Michael stood up. Emily, I was deceived. Sophie said it was my child. But you're also an accomplice, Michael, Emily looked at her husband. You betrayed your wife and destroyed our home. That's a fact. Emily reached for the envelope again. There's something I haven't shown you yet. Records of messages from Jim to Sophie. Sophie's face turned completely pale. Jim has a new girlfriend and thinks he's completely done with you, Emily read from the records. But you told him too that it might be your child. Michael was stunned. So you decided it was my child without knowing whose it was? Sophie was completely cornered and collapsed onto the sofa. Her perfect plan had been completely exposed by Emily's calm investigation. Emily looked down at the two of them. A DNA test would make it clear, wouldn't it? Until then, nobody knows whose child it is. Michael stood there for several minutes. He felt his world crashing down with a sound. He had betrayed his beloved wife, destroyed his home, and now faced the reality that he too had been deceived. Sophie, Michael's voice was trembling. Did you use me? Sophie remained seated on the sofa, shedding tears. However, Emily couldn't tell whether those tears were genuine regret or frustration that her plan had failed. No, Michael, Sophie desperately defended herself. I really love you. The thing with Jim, that's in the past. The past? Michael picked up the photos. All these photos are recent, aren't they? You were meeting with Jim while having a relationship with me. Emily quietly sat in a chair and observed their exchange. Her husband's agitation and confusion, and her sister's desperate excuses. Both looked pitiful. Michael, didn't you really notice anything? Emily asked gently. That Sophie had suddenly become more beautiful, was wearing new clothes, and was going out more often? Michael couldn't answer. He had indeed noticed Sophie's changes, but thought they were because of his relationship with her. Weren't you certain it was my child? Michael pressed Sophie. When you told me about the pregnancy, you declared it was my child. Sophie answered while crying, but it might be your child. Statistically. Statistics? Michael's voice rose. You destroyed my life based on statistics? Emily stood up and walked to the window. The snow outside was getting heavier, painting the garden trees white. It seemed ironic that such ugly truth was being exposed in this beautiful house. Sophie, can you tell me your real plan? Emily turned around and asked. You calculated everything from the beginning, didn't you? Sophie initially tried to deny it, but perhaps defeated by Emily's calm gaze, she finally gave up. Yes, Sophie said defiantly. I was always jealous of Emily. A wonderful husband, a beautiful house, a stable job. I had nothing. So you tried to steal everything, Emily said quietly. When I broke up with Jim, I was in despair, Sophie continued. But living in this house, watching Michael, he was kind and understanding, and I thought I could make him happier than Emily could. Michael stared at Sophie with a stunned expression. Weren't you in love with me? I was in love. Sophie shouted. But at the same time, I couldn't forget Jim. So when I got pregnant, I didn't know whose child it was, but it was more convenient to say it was Michael's. Emily sighed deeply. So you seduced my husband, tried to use pregnancy as a weapon to steal everything from me. And you deceived Michael without knowing whose child it was. But we could have been happy. Sophie attempted one last resistance. Sister can't have children, so Michael and I are better suited for each other. Michael stood up from the sofa. Enough, Sophie. I'm sick of hearing your words. He turned to Emily. Emily, I did something irreversible. I betrayed you and destroyed our home. I have no excuses. Emily looked at her husband quietly. That's right, Michael. You betrayed me. But I acknowledge that you were also a victim in some ways. No, I have no right to make excuses, Michael shook his head. I had a wife, yet I had a relationship with your sister. That's a fact. Emily took out another envelope from her handbag. Actually, there's something else I haven't shown you. Sophie's face turned pale again. Details of Jim and Sophie's message exchanges. Emily opened the envelope. Sophie, you told Jim the same thing. I'll seduce Emily's husband and get a rich family's house. Sophie was completely speechless. So for you, Michael, Jim, and I were all just tools to satisfy your desires. Emily's voice mixed sadness and contempt. Michael sat down in a chair. I was completely deceived. That's right, Emily agreed. But you still betrayed me. The result doesn't change. Emily took out the final document. This is divorce papers, Michael. I've already prepared them. Michael was surprised. You had already decided? Yes, Emily answered quietly. From when I learned about your relationship, I thought this ending was inevitable. The only question was what conditions we'd separate under. But can't we start over? Michael asked with his last hope. I was deceived. I truly love you. Emily smiled sadly. Michael, love is built on trust. The moment you betrayed me, that trust was lost forever. But I was deceived by Sophie, Michael desperately appealed. Still, you made choices, Emily shook her head. In difficult times, instead of supporting your wife, you chose to escape to another woman. That's the truth. Sophie suddenly stood up. Sister, it's all my fault. Don't blame Michael. What are you saying now, Sophie? Emily replied coldly. You called me defective and cursed me as a failure. Those words can't be taken back. But You've talked enough. Emily raised her hand to stop her. Until the DNA test results come out, whatever you two do is up to you, but I won't participate in this farce anymore. Emily placed the divorce papers on the table. Michael, please sign this. Consult with my lawyer about property division. Emily, won't you give me one more chance? Michael made his final plea. No, Emily's answer was clear. Our marriage is over. Because of your choices. At that moment, Sophie's cell phone rang. Jim was displayed on the screen. All three stared at the screen simultaneously. Ironically, Jim's call came at this very moment. Sophie couldn't answer the phone. Reality was exposing the shallowness of her plan. Why don't you answer? Emily said with irony. Maybe he'll take you and the child. Sophie broke down crying. Her supposedly perfect plan had ended in complete failure. 3 months later, in spring, when cherry blossoms began to bloom in Pittsburgh, Emily was drinking her morning coffee in the sunroom of the house she inherited from her grandmother. The divorce proceedings had been completed smoothly, and Michael had left the house with alimony. Sophie had also disappeared before the DNA test results came out. The DNA test results were as Emily had expected. The child's father was Jim. However, by then Jim had a new girlfriend and had completely cut ties with Sophie. Sophie had to prepare for childbirth alone, and the last message she sent to Emily simply said, "I'm sorry." Emily didn't reply. Michael had returned to his parents' home and was starting over his work as an architectural designer from scratch. Several letters of apology had arrived from him, but Emily disposed of them without reading. She wanted to look toward the future rather than dwelling on the past. Emily's new life was more fulfilling than she had imagined. She threw herself into her work at the pediatric clinic with even more enthusiasm than before, earning increased trust from her colleagues. And she had found a new dream, becoming a foster parent. How was the foster parent registration interview? Asked Carol, the head nurse at the clinic and Emily's colleague. It went very well, Emily smiled. The first training session starts next month. The decision to stop infertility treatments was made during the divorce proceedings. In her final consultation with the doctor, Emily quietly said, "That's enough." Rather than continuing to obsess over becoming a biological mother, she chose the path of becoming a mother to children who needed love. On weekends, Emily sat in front of her grandmother's photograph and spoke quietly. "Grandmother, I've decided to create a new family." Emily gazed at her grandmother's kind face in the photo. A family connected not by blood, but by bonds of love. Her grandmother always used to say, family means trusting and supporting each other. Emily now truly understood the meaning of those words. That afternoon, Emily was tending to flowers in the garden. Her neighbor, Mrs. Davis, called out to her. "Emily, you look so radiant lately," said the kind 70-year-old Mrs. Davis. "This new beginning is turning out well for you." "Thank you, Mrs. Davis," Emily replied, washing her hands from the soil. Indeed, life does take unexpected directions. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, Mrs. Davis smiled. Sometimes the most difficult experiences open doors to the most beautiful new chapters. In the evening, Emily was reading materials about the foster care system while thinking about the new life to come. Soon, children's laughter might echo through this house. It was different from the family she had long dreamed of, but it might be more meaningful. About Michael and Sophie's afterwards, she occasionally heard through the grapevine. Michael was working hard at his new job but seemed to be living a lonely life. Sophie was raising the child alone and was reportedly in financial difficulty. Emily no longer felt anger toward them. She only felt pity. One day, Emily received special news at work. She was ready to welcome her first child as a foster parent. It was a 7-year-old girl who had lost her parents in an accident and needed temporary care. "Her name is Lily," explained Mrs. Johnson, the social worker. "She's a very bright child who aspires to become a nurse." Emily's heart filled with warm feelings. Perhaps fate was giving her a new mission. That night, Emily prayed in the moonlight streaming through the window. May the new chapter beginning tomorrow be filled with love and hope. And may true happiness someday come to those who betrayed her. The spring wind passed through the window, announcing the beginning of a new season. A new chapter in Emily Harrison's life was about to begin. This time, it was time to build a real family.